Welcome to Hort Culture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture.
Greetings, plants,
Earthlings.
people.
I was going to say Earthlings. We're on the
Welcome
same
to
vibe.
another episode of Hort Culture. And
Hello.
today we're joined by all four of our core team here. And I wanted to open by asking you all, do you garden? And if so, why the heck do you do that?
I garden in pots predominantly, and because I think it's really exciting to grow weird things that I've never grown before. Or I just picked up some turmeric. I'm going to grow some turmeric this year. I'm just excited to grow some plants that I can also eat.
So you like to eat it? Do you like to look at it?
I mean, I like to see it thriving. Yeah, I like to see my success.
Oh, I think of it as like it's the plant's success, and you're just there to.
Listen, I gotta take some credit because I don't get very much.
Look at you, lemon tree.
What about y'all?
Money. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, because we do market gardens, but I just like having the fresh produce to eat, like, and then preserving some of it, and then having it like right now this time of year. Like, we just cracked open another jar of strawberry jam the other day from some of the strawberries we had. So I like seeing that. And like Alexis said, trying the weird varieties, like trying something new. Like, I'm not allowed to grow this kind of stuff with the stuff that's going to market. But like, I've ordered purple. I might have already talked about this. I'm very excited about it. I've ordered purple sweet corn.
Oh, nice.
It's supposed to stay purple when it is cooked. And that doesn't normally happen when you have purple vegetables. They turn gray.
Are you going to have to separate that from the other sweet corn?
So I will report back. Hey, Dad.
Is it grape flavored?
I don't know. My kids might think it might be grape flavored.
It's purple drink flavored.
Yeah, it's just purple drink flavor.
Tasty. Oh, yeah.
Purple drink.
No, it will be separated. I said, Ray, Dad, because my father-in-law and my dad both said, you can't plant that near the other sweet corn. It might cross-pollinate. And I was like, well, you know, I only have a horticulture degree and been doing this for so many years.
I actually have this degree that neither of you have. Thank you.
So, yes. So we got that just for fun, right? Purple corn, sweet corn.
Purple corn.
Is it something that people have, you said for market, is that right, Jessica? For market or for home or both or whatever?
I think for both. I mean, it was advertised in a very common seed catalog that sells a lot of products for homeowners and market growers. So,
I mean, that's one of the cool things about farmers market, if you're a market producer, is growing novel things. And we've had a lot of discussion about this over the last couple of weeks during a lot of community classes. We've had several strawberry classes, and we've had asparagus, and we have other small berries, brambles, things like that coming up. But the novel things that you won't necessarily find that are mainstream, that, you know, kind of a ship first kind of variety, picked first and foremost for its durability for shipping rather than for its maybe flavor. But that's one of the cool things about like market stuff and growing stuff for home, Brett, just to kind of speak to your question, is you can choose varieties that the first quality you look for in those varieties is that it tastes the best to you, or it looks cool, or it's just weird. Alexis and Jessica, purple corn and whatever Alexis has going on over there. But choice, and you can grow some of these cool things. You know, for me, it's sometimes I think it's almost like childhood trauma. I said, I'm never coming back to this. I never have to pick another bushel of market beans in my entire life. But I came back to it at a certain point in my life because it's what I grew up with. And, you know, I kind of waxed nostalgic at some point and came back around to that. But a lot of it is kind of the qualities of these things, these heirlooms. I mean, heirlooms have their own challenges if you're talking about growing them, but boy, it more than makes up for it when you pick these things and fix these things, as far as the different qualities. But for me, it's just about choice. and there's joy in growing things, just for me personally too. I'm sure there is for all of you guys in one respect or another. But yeah, that's cool. Purple corn and turmeric,
I
Alexis.
will
I
give
mean,
updates as the season goes on.
yeah, very curious. Do you get requests for things like that? Does that drive some of the interest, or did you just see purple corn and be
That
like,
was just an
purple corn? That's
impulse.
weird. Okay.
I was supposed to be ordering other seeds that were for legit, on
Hmm.
the order list for the
Hmm.
business, and then I was like, "Well, look at that. Well, let's just add that to cart," right?
You, I'm the one
Um,
ordering. I'm going to do what I
Also,
want.
yeah, got
Okay,
some Beauregard sweet potatoes because why not? My
that's a
son is
standard.
named
That's a good one.
Beauregard,
Yeah.
and he thought that was cool. Um, yeah, but sometimes with the market, getting some, like, unique veggies like that, however you think, a lot of times you're like, "Oh, this is really cool, a different kind of variety that's gonna sell," right? But people are often very leery of that. So, experience over time, we
Hmm.
did one year, we had, like, red, white, and blue potatoes. My husband was very excited about this, and he was like, "They are going to sell." They didn't really. Patty pan squash, right? The people either love it or they hate it. A squash variety that we grow every year that is very popular now, and I think, like, our market, like, the people know to look for it, and they know it's really good is, a yellow squash called Zephyr, and it's, like, half yellow, half green.
Hmm.
Um, but I know, like, when I see that being offered at other markets or maybe it hasn't been I've seen it offered in the market where I work at here, and people are like, "What's wrong with that squash?" Right? Like, they're not it's something's wrong with it. So sometimes it works, and other times people are just looking for those traditional, you know, what you know kind of varieties. So you gotta
White
kinda
heifer beans.
win
Yes.
the customer over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like
Well,
they're
so
middle ground there. Yeah.
I'm pure like vibes based gardener now. So like if it doesn't contribute to the vibe or it detracts from the vibe, it's out.
Don't kill my vibe.
Don't kill my vibe. And the reason I ask about that, so like I want a space to spend time in that it feels like there's plants growing and it's cool and it's
Yeah.
relaxing and it's all those things. And that's one of the reasons why a couple of years ago we completely shifted from growing like annual vegetables to growing perennials.
Hmm.
Is just a different thing. And
That's
the
what
reason
brings you
I
joy.
reason I open by asking this is because I think that it's something that's kind of some people would roll their eyes and be like, "Oh, that's very Brett question that you're asking. Who cares? I grow the plants. It's gardening. Stop turning this into some sort of thought experiment." But I will not stop
I
ever.
will not stop.
And also, I think it's an important thing. And we talk about this with folks who are operating businesses or who are operating, some sort of an organization. But also, I think it's important to just like reflect a little bit as you enter into conversations like we're going to have today about budget gardening, gardening on a budget. What is the reason that you're doing this in the first place? And so, if your reason for doing this is you want to space outside to spend some time and grow some plants and see them grow, great, keep that in mind. If your reason for doing this is you want to have really tasty stuff to eat from your garden throughout the course of the season, and you really enjoy, making some salsa and having friends over and eating it, great. If what you're trying to do is offset household expenditures, you're trying to save money by growing stuff for yourself, great. But keep that in mind. And I think there's some other reasons that I'll talk about later that I think aren't great reasons to garden that sometimes people get caught up in. But so as we embark on this conversation about gardening on a budget, just remember there's different reasons people do this in the first place. For some people,
Hmm.
it's just a hobby, it's just a thing. And so you're not trying to spend too much money on your hobby, and so you want to save a little money here and there, great. But if you're really trying to save some money, well, it's easy to not do that while gardening. Um, and so we hope to head that off, but also acknowledge that as we talk about gardening budget, gardening on a budget. And I think one of the things that we might recommend for anyone is to make a plan. This is just something, Jessica, that you say you've talked about in some of your classes in the past. So what do you goes into something like a plan, and why might that be useful for a budget, for gardening on a budget?
Well, I think, like, you gotta think about what is your environment like at home first, right? Like, do you live in an apartment? Do you have space in a backyard to put a raised bed, or maybe you're just growing in containers, or do you actually have ground you can till up, right? Um, I think that's where, you wanna start at. And then consider, as you mentioned, all those other things. Do you need something just as simple as, "I just wanna grow a few herbs on in a flower pot just to add, just have a little culinary
Little
pl"
zhuzh.
Yeah, or am I wanting to grow tomatoes and peppers and the whole shebang to do salsa and then can that salsa and have it, to eat throughout the year? Um, so that's my first thing I think about is, like, what is your growing situation like? Right? Like, what can you do? Because 'Cause that'll really determine very quickly how much you can do. Followed by, like, you know, what I think I always tell a lot of people with garden planning and when they decide you actually wanna pick stuff that you like
Yes.
because you can waste money very quickly by
Yes.
growing a lot of things that you don't really like to eat. Does your family like eggplant? Do you only eat eggplant parmesan? Is that the only way you're gonna use it? I always give the example in a lot of my classes of with ghost peppers. My husband really likes spicy peppers. Do you know each one of those pepper plants produce 50 to 75 peppers themselves? So maybe we don't need to plant 25 ghost pepper plants, right? So I think that's like starting off there where you're planning what you like to eat, those ultimate goals. What is your environment like to start planting? And then you can elaborate from there to different ways to make it more efficient. From if you're
Mhm.
doing like a raised bed, you can incorporate square foot gardening. You can, part of that plan, figuring out also like, am I just gonna grow stuff in the spring? Do I want something that's gonna last all summer, or fall? Do I wanna put all the time and energy into producing, um that tomato plant? Ray made a very good comment earlier about what the $100 tomato plant, right? All the time and energy you put into it and inputs to get, maybe
To
just a
save a
couple
dollar at the grocery
save a
store.
dollar at the grocery
Yeah.
store. So, that's
Yeah,
where I start with.
I think so. The theme that I'm kind of getting from this is you're gonna if you're choosing that you're gonna do the garden and you're gonna invest the time, you're gonna invest the energy, etc. Setting up the plants and yourself to have success with the things that you are investing in is better than doing way too many things that you aren't prepared to invest in or aren't going to use. And so it's about this kind of setting yourself up for success translates to less wasted money and wasted time and anguish and all these other things. I think another piece of that too that I have seen is like being realistic about the amount of space that you have. And you said this kind of with we're living in an apartment, but even like if you have a 10 by 10 square in your yard that you want to commit to the garden, you are not helping yourself by jam packing it so tight with plants that are when they're little tiny things. And then it becomes this abomination of a garden that you can't even get into harvest. Everything's diseased, overlapping each other. It's just suffocating each other. And so you've ended up spending a bunch of money on plants, and you maybe could have had two or three, a pepper plant, a tomato plant, and a row of onions in that space that would have been a much more, useful. Like you're actually going to get those things out, you're going to grow them, and you're going to feel good about it. It's also easier to weed and take care of and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of the what I'm hearing you say. Do you all make plans for your gardens?
Uh, yeah,
Making plans, and
yeah.
then there's like the care for the plant. So I think what we've talked about so far is like the physical space, the amount of space. But then there's like the second tier of like, how are you going to water it? How are you going to trellis it? And I say that from like I think of the plants that I have not that I did not trellis in time. And so therefore they're like floppy. They make me mad when I want to harvest them. They're not high quality. And so they're just, I just can't deal with it. So I just don't, and to what you're saying, like the disease and all these other issues that come with it, that's like the secondary step of the plan. There's the physical space. What can I fit here? What makes sense? What do I like? And then there's, okay, is there anything special? Do I need a tomato cage? Do I need some netting? Do I need, to have some bird netting or whatever? Do I have a hose that reaches the space? That kind of stuff is also
And you
important, because
bring up
when you're watering those containers, 4 times a day because you didn't put you put too many plants in a pot, it's a little annoying.
Yeah, you bring up a good point with that, with like the watering. And I was thinking in my mind too, like with containers, just because sometimes we see online or places that, this tomato plant is thriving in this one little small container. In reality, it might not thrive in that size of a container, right? So that's the
Yeah,
other thing, like
it may have
figuring
thrived
out,
for a week and then it's
right.
going to go
Then,
downhill.
yep. So like figuring out like certain plants do better in certain size containers, part of that planning.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about containers in a second, but I think just to make sure we're connected back, we're talking about logistics of gardening, right? This is the basics of how to get set up, and that may feel like what we're talking about here, but the reality is all of us have seen, and maybe someone here, we'll call him Brett, has experienced this where you put out too much or you put stuff out in a bad setup that wasn't logistically well planned based on the basics that you all are laying out. And then the whole thing ends up becoming a loss, which is the
Hmm.
opposite of gardening on a budget. You have now
Yeah.
put out however much money, time, and energy, and then you don't end up with it. So, like, as we drift into talking about how to do gardening well, the underpinning of all this is to say, like, we want to make sure that the time, energy, and money is well invested and it yields something. That's just something that I found. Containers, though, what is the vibe on containers? Because for me, I'm like, oh, a container might make it more manageable, make me more likely to take care of it. I could put it right behind my back door or whatever. Positives, negatives. What do y'all think about that?
I love me a container. And by container, I mean the mineral buckets that Jessica has given me. Which, if you're not familiar,
Size matters sometimes
yeah,
with
which if you're not familiar, are about, I don't know, about 2 foot tall, maybe 2 feet in diameter. And so maybe a little less than that. So a pretty large container, aka I can easily grow a tomato plant in one. I tried to put more than one just, to see if I could. Do not recommend. Will I probably do it again because I want to? Probably, but I don't recommend it. But yeah,
So
I
it's like
think
the size of like
containers.
a short garbage can, like what you put up out the
Small
street,
tub kind of
but
thing.
shorter.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think containers are a really awesome way. As someone who has plenty of in-ground space that I could grow in, I'm choosing to grow my vegetables in containers because I just think it's a little bit easier. I can put them right by the water. It makes it a little bit more of an enjoyable experience because I'm not weeding them. I can see problems with them right away. And yeah, I just think it's a little bit more of an enjoyable. It's less of a chore and more of like a thing I like to do for myself. It's a reward.
I like
The
that.
biggest hurdles with containers that I've found working with people is just the sheer, we're talking about cost. And, any cost that we're talking about
Hmm.
today, you have to kind of spread that over how many years the useful life of that material, that input is. It's kind of important, but that also plays into the soil of containers. It's expensive, especially if you're doing primarily a peat based soil, and it's important to realize that peat based media that doesn't last forever. You have to supplement that, you have to refresh that. You certainly don't throw that out when it does get a bit tired. You can kind of dump it out and remix it with
Hmm.
amend that with some organic matter. But that's the number one cost of input cost for containers is my goodness, the soil, and finding a
Hmm.
good raised bed mix that works well across different sizes of containers and raised beds, sometimes can be pretty difficult. And that's the main frustration point that I see people have is the cost of the medium, if you can even find it, the media,
Yeah.
the
Thinking
the
of
mix.
the idea of like budget, we're talking about containers that could be, raised bed, which we don't often think of as a container, or, what I'm talking about, like a pot type of system. I've
Hmm.
seen a lot of success with because this is an artificial system, right? Where the soil profile is not working the same way as it does in ground, right? And so I've seen people have a lot of success. I've had a lot of success with using some sort of like mulch or large, if you have a really deep raised bed, you can use, it's kind of leans back into this thing called Culture, which is, you're starting at the base with some like larger not stems, but branches, and then you're slowly reducing your particle size. So you start out with some larger branches, then you go to some more like something like sticks, and then you go to mulch, and then you have this top, 2 foot or something of a topsoil mix or a potting soil mix or something like that. And so it's a way to fill your beds on a in a cheaper way. And a lot of the time, if you're, in an area where you can have access to, things like this, on the farm, or a tree falls down, or, something like that. Sometimes you can get mulch for free from the cities. So if you have a really big container where it can be cost prohibitive to do that, you can modify in a way there. And so, then you're spreading out your inputs. Instead of, you might have to refresh once every year we add one bag of compost or topsoil or something. So it's just a lot more budget friendly in that way.
Yeah, so we started the conversation about raised beds. I say we go there fully now because I feel like raised beds are sort of like the most idyllic Instagram, Pinterest coded, like, oh, the
Some of the
nicest
best and
raised bed.
some of the
And
most
yeah.
challenging, some of the
Yeah.
absolute most challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so
Yeah.
I'll just, one thing I'll note is in the world of commercial horticulture and in our former backyard, a raised bed actually doesn't have any sort of frame on it. It's literally just soil
Mound.
that has been kind of mounded up. And so if you see like out in California, they grow strawberries or cantaloupes or something like that, and they literally make these crazy huge mounds that they grow it in. It might be end up being 10 inches deep. It's kind of wild. And so there is an option if you're looking to increase drainage, if that's why you're trying to do the raised bed thing or whatever, to literally just mound up some soil into a pile and plant into the middle of that. But if people have in mind the lovely framed in maybe cedar plank raised beds, do you all have any kind of thoughts about that? I mean, so I, just to give you an example, um, I have access to some really nice railroad ties that are covered in tar and other carcinogens, and I was just wondering if that would be a good. They're free, and so I was just wondering if that would be a good idea for me to make raised beds out of, or that's a way to
So
save
you
money.
you can line those with plastic. Still not recommended because that plastic can rip, and you use the word carcinogen, so you kind of gave it away why that is not a good idea
Oh,
to use
sorry.
railroad ties. But from a visual perspective, you could use that to frame up something that's maybe not as attractive, that is safe to use, maybe some sheet metal, or something else, and then you can put your railroad ties at it over that. If you're in an HOA and you got to be really aesthetically pleasing, you can also line those railroad ties with a plastic to keep from it. But plastic,
Risky.
we're dealing with sharp tools on a constant basis, right? So lining something with plastic doesn't seem to be super long term, but it is possible.
So is it something where, like, is that a situation where you would be better off, you think, to buy materials, or is you all have thoughts on seeing good applications for any adaptive reuse of stuff in those contexts? Any other
There's everything in
non
the
railroad
world.
ties?
The one of the local pizza places right down from where my home is, they've used one of these mobile. It's a kind of a mineral feed bunk, Jessica. It's one of the half bunks that are plastic
Mhm.
lined. You can drag them around, and they do a very good job in that. I mean, the possibilities are endless as long as the material itself, source material, is safe and doesn't have any leachates in it. That's a
Yeah,
problem.
I think,
Yeah, there's all
we
kinds
talk
of things.
we talk about a lot with, like, growing veggies and stuff, is like, or anything can be used as a pot, right? As long as it can, to a
Straw
point,
bales.
right?
Straw bales can be a
Because we don't
pot.
want those railroad ties like that, but, like, as long as it can contain the soil and has great drainage. Because if you don't have that good drainage, you're just setting yourself up for failure. But as Ray mentioned, like those cattle feeders like that, or a lot of people I've seen, they use old water troughs, like the galvanized ones that are
Mhm.
like, they might be rusted on the bottom and already have, they're leaking. So another use for them that
Yeah,
way.
perfect.
Yeah, there's, as you have said too, straw bale gardening. That's a whole other, I don't know, task project, lots of other inputs that go into that one, right? A
Yeah.
lot of more fertilizer costs that
Yeah.
has to go into those, but that is also another option for growing your veggies in. And it does well. If you season your bells the correct way, plants are happy and you will get some good production out of
I don't
them.
necessarily plant in straw bales, but I've used that, and it kind of made me think about it when Brett mentioned one of my favorite systems is just mound production, because you get the drainage for a crop like home strawberry is absolutely critical because of all the associated root rots. But and you don't have to have sides on it as long as you adhere to the principles of not walking on the soil constantly and keeping good, organic matter levels in there. But I've started those mound cultures with strawberry bells, and it started out looking more like a raised bed garden. But as the straw bales quickly break down and start to decompose, you just sort of incorporate those into the mound, and what once initially looked like a raised bed now is more of a mound. So I've done that, but just year in and year out over the years, the number one problem, and I know we're talking about kind of garden economics, does it make sense? But the number one frustration point for raised bed gardens is just modulating fertilizer. It's a boom and bust cycle. And we had a big discussion on container strawberries last week. We had a couple there that were doing some things commercially. They were like, "Well, what's your schedule?" I'm like, "There is no schedule. It's based on the weather. You're planting in an artificial medium that's heavy artificial media. Um, it's not mineral based soil. I guess what I'm trying to say there has no nutrient holding capacity. And instead of using granular fertilizer a couple times a year like you would in ground strawberry production, my goodness, you're fertilizing every 2 weeks. Twice as much, 10 times as much. And I've done petio analysis, to see how raised beds react with fertilizer inputs. And I've never gotten a consistent analysis of plant tissue because it's all over the board. It's just boom and bust. So nutrient management's incredibly difficult on raised beds. It can be done, but that's one of the differences that can add a frustration point, but also can take a little bit more time and add a little bit more inputs. That's why I say kind of raised beds are sort of a boom or bust, it seems like sometimes.
Yeah.
I love raised beds. I love containers, but there's just some considerations you have to make up front. It's a completely different ball game than if you were planting, you know, in native soil, mineral based soil. It's just completely different.
Yeah. And so, like, for instance, if you were going to plant a tomato in a raised bed,
Mhm.
comparing to planting it in the ground, maybe you till up your soil, you add some fertilizer at the beginning when you're working in the ground, and the tomato's fine for the whole season actually because
Yeah.
you have some nice clay soil. It's holding on to those nutrients,
Mhm.
and it probably would have been benefited from fertilizer a little bit later, but it does
Compost seeds,
okay.
yeah.
And if you try that same thing, and sometimes in a raised bed, it's your by the time it gets to being big and having leaves and putting on fruit, it's
Yeah.
hurting for some nutrition,
Yeah.
and yeah, that's a challenge. I think of anytime you move away from this magical thing we call the soil,
Yeah.
uh, you have to take on some of those responsibilities that the soil was taking care of for you. So, I mean, that's a nice transition to, do I have to grow in a raised bed? How grandma used to just dig a hole and put it in the ground.
Goodness, I would tell people that if you can plant in the soil, I know Alexis plants in containers for a very, specific reasons, and there's reasons you would do that. That's the number one money saving thing and frustration thing you can do. That if you have tillable soil, Jessica mentioned it, the number one thing you can do is use the resource that you have on hand. If you have good land resources, there is no replacing that. If you have good tillable soil, take advantage of that. There's some real benefits, cost saving benefits, and frustration saving benefits to using your native soil. It's the best resource you have.
Can I interject? You cannot take native soil and put it in raised beds or
If you
containers. It
want
does not.
concrete, you can, Alexis.
It,
It will
boom,
make
nailed it. It
yeah,
does not work the
yeah,
same because I can hear some
yeah.
of you all going, "Well, why wouldn't I just mix the best of both worlds?"
Mm,
Unfortunately, that is not how that works.
yeah,
So just gonna nip that in the bud right here.
yeah.
And then can you say, I know you all said concrete. I'd never not tried growing in concrete, so I assume that's bad. But can you just say why, a little bit of like why it doesn't work?
One of the reasons you're disrupting the soil
Mm,
profiles, right? So
yeah.
we've talked before about soil. Soil has layers, and we'll say topsoil. That's literally it's on top of the soil. It is often the heaviest nutrient base, and then you kind of go down. So if you dig that up, you're not going to be able to pull out this perfect little slice of lasagna and plop it down into your garden, right? You're going to be digging it up and mixing it all together. Um, that makes your microbes not in a good order. It makes all of your particles not mix up well together. They are accustomed to being at certain levels in in the soil profile. So that's one reason, and those mixing together can cause your clay to clump up and become really hard. And just be really difficult to grow in. So just a lot of
And
reasons. Yeah.
not even accounting for all the weed seed you've introduced as
Ooh, yeah.
well. That's
Point,
what I
Jess.
always think about. A project once we had with another group that they had already built the raised beds, and they had somebody who was generous to donate the soil. Do you know what we grew in those raised beds? We grew Johnson grass.
Ragweed.
Well, ragweed too, yeah, and Johnson grass.
Yeah.
Both
It was a
terrible.
horrible battle of and that usually that's a quick way to, when people are debating, I don't really want to purchase, soil
Mhm.
to fill in my raised beds. And then if you're quickly to be like, hey, you're just going to be doing just as much weeding in that
Right,
case, that
right.
usually gets them to be like, oh,
For
okay.
years and
Yeah.
years,
We
yeah.
talk a lot about soil solarizing and prep work. If you're going to have a larger home garden and you're changing locations, is a year before you plant, and it's not always possible, but if you have the time and the resources and the land, to do so, is that year before you plant is your weed control starts then a year before with solarization, which we have programs just on soil solarizing, those 6 to 8 weeks in the process there. Or if you're using whatever double till and you're, trying to extinguish the seed bed or at least deplete it a little bit. There's all this work you can do before you actually plant a new area or plant in ground. But prep work is real important, and we don't think a lot about that. And that's 12 to 18 months before you actually plant. You certainly don't have to have that kind of lead time. I don't want to discourage anyone. I'm just saying, like Jessica's saying, and Alexis is, there's always a seed bed in Kentucky and everywhere as you go. And when you start to till in the soil, you expose, weed seeds to air and water and sunlight, and they germinate. So
Mhm.
you can head
That
off a
kind
lot of
of
those problems if you prep.
yeah, that, heading off problems also, takes you down the path of, you know, buying something quality up front is going to save you money in the long run. And so
Mhm.
we've all been in a position, doesn't matter what it is, where you're like, I'm going to buy this cheaper thing, and then it breaks in a year, and then you've got to buy it again. And if you had bought the more expensive thing up front, it would have been cheaper, right? And so there, of course, is always a balance to that. It helps if you know somebody who has used those tools or has done
Mhm.
something similar. You can get some opinions in that for sure. So if you got questions on, specific tools or something like that, please feel free to reach out. We've all worked on a lot of different stuff, but whether that's tools or, planning and saying, I'm gonna spend some money on quality soil or
Mhm.
quality media for my pots so that I'm not spending as much on fertilizer, or I'm not having to weed my beds, can be really the right thing to do up front if you've got the money to do it up front.
Alexis, that also brings up a good point of I thought you were going with purchasing quality transplants, and then you were like
Yeah,
tools. And so,
totally.
but I was in my mind, I was like, oh, she's gonna mention buying quality transplants, right? Like
Mhm.
it might be a little more expensive versus that clearance one,
Yeah,
but that clearance one might already have something
clearance for
majorly
a
wrong with
reason.
it. Yeah,
Mhm.
right. It could be there just because wherever you're buying it, maybe they don't water that great, right? And it's a little
Mhm.
crispy, but it could also have other major issues that's just going to cost you more in the long run. So,
Mhm.
like buying good quality, healthy transplants, investing in
Less
those,
sprays,
or
less
yeah,
fertilizer.
yeah,
Yeah.
or seeds too. Like talking about seeds, you can
Stop buying them from Etsy.
right, and yeah, and don't buy them because they Amazon. Don't buy them off Amazon too. So many
Yeah,
people
stop
get them
buying
from
them.
like weird places. Buy them from a legit seed company. You know,
Or sometimes your
Or a seed
local
swap.
extension office will have
oh
either a
yeah,
seed swap or a seed giveaway,
we got seed
or even
packets.
transplant. And Jessica, you mentioned that there are sometimes local high schools will have a greenhouse and their
Yeah.
FFA. You could say what that looks like.
Yeah, I'd encourage everyone to check out, like, your local high schools if they have a greenhouse class in them. I know in our county, we have 2
A lot
high schools, and
do.
both of them have greenhouses, and their goal is they're learning all these horticultural practices, but they're
Mhm.
also growing, not only flowers, but a lot of
Veg.
vegetable transplants that they sell in the spring, and then the funds that they get from those goes back to the classroom for the following year, right? So they can do other projects in horticulture wise. But that's another good option of a more reasonable priced often. It's
Mhm.
like tomato plants or vegetable plants that you're looking for, and then your money is going back towards those students as well. Same thing with farmers markets. A lot of farmers, what they end up doing, there's some that just grow plants to sell at market, but I know a lot of other ones are growing them for themselves, right? So they're already
Mhm.
growing like these more unique varieties. Often they're investing in disease resistant varieties, things like that. And then when they have their surplus of plants, sometimes they bring those to the market to sell, right?
Mhm.
Because they don't need any extra ones. And so sometimes you can find some really great, healthy transplants that might be a unique variety. And as I mentioned, disease resistant kind of varieties that you might not purchase as a homeowner, right? You wouldn't want to pay that amount for that seed, right? Or they're selling
You
those
don't need
seeds.
500 seeds,
Yes.
right? You
Yeah.
need
They're like
3 plants,
500,
and it's
right?
cheaper to buy 3 plants and 500 seeds, yeah.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And then also just
Well,
share seeds too. Go in with
Seed
people.
swaps, plant
well,
swaps,
this
yeah.
is an interesting. It opens us up to a little bit of, I think, something where we might be a little bit of a house divided on this topic. So feel free to lash out at each other here. Starting seeds versus buying transplants. Budget.
Transplants are expensive. I'll be team start your own, but I don't think you should do it if you have tried it in the past and it's a point of frustration, or if you obviously have no interest. But if you have a strong interest, starting seeds can be cheap. I guess a case in point for me is I see a local. I've worked with a local community organization at a retirement facility. The last 5 or 6 years, they have had this beautiful, amazing community courtyard garden, a large planting, and they've produced every single transplant in little random containers in a sunny window, with very little input. And if they were to purchase those transplants on an annual basis, it would have been, I don't know, 1,500, $2,000. But it's incredible what they've done with almost no experience. But we've had some discussions with them, and we always have master gardeners working with this group, so they have good, solid growing knowledge. And they have sunlight, and they have little cups, containers that they put in, and they stick to the basics of tomatoes and peppers, things that are easy to germinate and grow. They do some flowers, but as Alexis and Jessica and Brett can tell you, some flowers are highly specialized. They have to go through special processes. They don't grow any of those. They grow things that are easy to germinate and grow, annual flowers and veggie transplants. So just watching that group just amazes me what they accomplish with very low tech. They have a warm window sill that runs the length of their community room. They grow hundreds of transplants. It's not a frustrating process to them. Now, sometimes if the weather's not great or if they start their plants, we really caution them about starting too early because then they get leggy. But for the most part, they turn their transplants, and sometimes they'll get a little tall if they have to delay planting. They do a good job, and they save a ton of money, and they have this beautiful garden. And there's some other value to them with getting the residents involved. But I watch groups like that grow these good quality transplants, that aren't always the most perfect stocky looking transplants like you would find in a greenhouse operation. So that just kind of solidifies my opinion that the average homeowner, if they have a little bit of ingenuity, they can grow their own transplants. And I see transplants as an input cost over the years. I remember buying bundles of bare root tomato plants, and we get those for $4 or $5, 25 to
Mhm.
50 tomato plants, $3.50, $4. That's not the case now. You get a little 6-pack, and it's what? If you go to a garden center, $6, $8 or whatever, which, things have, increased in price, but I'll be team transplant. And I know
Well, one thing
good
I'll
range.
remind everybody, there are some things that, I mean, there's nothing that you have to start from a transplant. There's some things you'd be crazy to not start from a transplant.
Mm.
Mhm.
And there's other things where you have the option. And
Yeah.
there's other things
Yeah.
that actually don't like to be transplanted at all.
No.
And so if you
Mhm.
are going to go super budget, put a seed in the ground, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
cut out the
Mhm.
transplant. You
Don't
don't have
do
to
a
buy
cucumber
media. You don't
transplant.
have to do,
Not good.
yeah.
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 Yeah. Cucumber,
Rule of thumb. Yeah, I was gonna say rule of thumb: the bigger the seed is, the easier it is to start, and the
Yeah.
bigger it is, the more likely you can put it directly into the ground.
Some things are
yeah.
real fragile, like all
Except
the
for like
cucurbits.
lettuce or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Beans, corn, peas, those are all good
Direct
options
sow.
for putting straight in
Mhm.
the ground.
Yeah.
And Alexis just mentioned things like lettuce, some lettuces and even kales
Carrots.
and stuff like that. You could throw out some seeds and see how it goes. Sometimes you'll see commercial operations will still do transplants of things like watermelons or cucumbers or whatever.
Mm.
It's just because they're trying to, enhance the odds that they're going to have a full field. But if you're, the real common thing people will do, for instance, with cucumbers, is they'll make a mound, kind of like what Ray was talking about, and in the center of the mound, drop a couple of seeds.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
if they all germinate, great. If you decide they all germinated and I don't want that many, you could just pull one out, thin it, and it's cost you, less than a penny to have that extra option. So I think, but if we are going to start transplants, who would like to take the opposite tack and say, if you're maybe be cautious about transplants?
I do.
I
I do both. Yeah.
I
Go
was gonna
ahead,
say,
Jess.
yeah, both as well. But you want to
Mhm.
go or me?
You go ahead.
I was just gonna say it again depends on your location.
Mhm.
As Ray was talking, I was thinking about the house that I used to live in. I could not start transplants in that house unless I invested in a grow light, right? So there's another cost. But eventually, would it pay? If I kept doing it, it'd probably pay itself off. Or if I have house plants, if you
Yeah.
use it multiple ways. But it all depends on your location.
Mhm.
At my current house or like my office here, I have great light that I could easily start transplants with just, being by a nice sunny window. So I think that's what you really got to think into it because I'm for both. I'm for starting your own for sure. And then also just, I think knowing your limitations and how much you want to, put into it because I've seen so many people who get so excited. They get discouraged, I guess, because they start them and then they
Yeah.
get really leggy
You
and
don't
then
want
they
you
don't
don't want
they
a bad
don't
experience.
really
Yeah.
they don't really do well. So
Mhm.
I think that's, if you do have a nice bright window, a good location for it, then you totally should try it,
Well, and
you
you
know?
mentioned, Jessica, what if you have a program that sells very affordable, high quality transplants, and it just happens to be a learning greenhouse, like at a high school program or whatever, and that plays in your mind too. My goodness, if every community had access to that kind of program, it may say, "Hey, we're going to support that program instead of growing our own." So yeah, that may kind of affect your
Give
opinion in
yourself
the end.
permission to not do it. You'd be like, you
Yeah,
know
I like
what?
that. Alexis, yeah, permission for me not to have to fool with it. Yeah, of course. Yeah,
I think
yeah.
another thing too is if there are particular varieties that you wanted to grow,
Mm.
you're probably not going to be able to find some of those weird
Oh, yeah.
things
Right.
unless you ask someone to grow stuff for you. But
Yeah.
and the other thing, I think another thing that Ray touched on was the I word of interest. uh, and it goes back to, why is it, are you interested in starting your own plants? Is it going to give you something to do and think about and play around with while you're hanging out inside waiting for stuff outside to grow? If you're interested in it and you want to do it and you want that to be part of your sort of your hobby, then the economic efficiency is less of a consideration, I think, than if you want. I am hanging my hopes on having a pepper plant, a tomato plant, and some onions in that garden patch that I'm growing. I'm going to let a professional get me on the path to
Sure.
getting that one single plant. But if I was going to start 50 plants or 100 plants, then it starts to become a little bit more of a challenge to kind of like, okay, that's going to be pretty pricey for the transplants. But as someone who this year, for the first time in a long time, is outsourcing some of our transplant starting to Alexis, uh, it I'll say this: it is relatively cheap to seed trays, Ray, but it is not cheap in emotion, time, investment, energy, everything else. And the thing that Jessica said too about the space, I think is
Yeah.
absolutely key. So we
Yeah.
have a space that's really sunny, but that section is not conditioned or heated. And so I can have heat mats, I can do that, but when we get the inevitable cold snap in March, April,
Mm-hmm.
it gets cold out there, and sometimes we lose a bunch of transplants, and then I'm mad.
It's
And
I
so
mean, there's a million different ways you can be frustrated growing transplants, and there's a lot of ways that it could be very satisfying. I've done them both. I've been very upset with leggy plants when someone at the office turns the heat up at night 74 degrees when it should be 64. I'm like, why are my plants getting leggy? And then I find out the cleaning crew's been really keeping it warm day and night. And I'm like, no, I don't want. But yeah, the
don't you know we're growing transplants here?
yeah, I'm like, come on, it's supposed to be 64. They're like, we have groups in there. I'm like, turn it down. Yeah, so I
I can
mean,
shiver.
yeah, you can't always get the perfect growing conditions. That's a great point. But one thing I don't think we've touched on as I'm looking at the time here on our episode. Growing up, we put I don't know, my family would can 300 to 400 cans preserve, whatever we grew in the garden. And that was the number one cost saving thing that we realized doesn't have anything to do with growing. And I believe you need to make that consideration up front. You have to plan to not be frustrated by your success. Home gardens can be so incredibly productive that it can bring you to the point of frustration. You're like, these tomatoes won't stop growing. Why do I have so many tomatoes or so many green beans? But I believe if you plan on, a preservation plan, one of the greatest things you can do is gardens are very productive annuals for the most part. There's some perennials like asparagus and things like that we grow. But for the most part, we're talking about annual plantings that have the capability to be one pack of seeds, tomato seeds or green bean, that's strict. So can be so incredibly productive that you're going to be like, oh, I can't consume these fresh fast enough if you overplant. So I think you have to make that decision when you put your garden out or before you do, when you're thinking about quantities and your space that you have. Are you going to consume this stuff fresh, or are you going to involve yourself in a totally different process that may or may not be your jam? No pun intended. It
Ayo.
may or how much you're going to be involved in food preservation. But that's how my family really saved a lot of money, was involving themselves like all in on preservation. And that was something that my mom kind of stressed early on. She goes, no, we will eat all that we can eat fresh, but the real thing is, you start washing those mason jars like a month in advance. We'd have jar washing parties, but make that consideration: fresh consumption versus preservation. That can be a big point that can save you a lot of money and save you some frustration of, once again, having such a bounty, you can't consume it all fresh. So I don't want any of that to go to waste. I think that's an important consideration.
And it's
Yeah,
fantastic to be able to have fresh, well, frozen, but fresh sweet corn like
Oh
right
yeah,
now, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Or to have some of those other products, and they're
Mhm.
great. They're better than what you're getting at the store frozen, you know. But then it just gets you more excited for actual growing season to get it actually really fresh. So
Yeah, whether
so
freezing, canning, or whatever. Yeah, good products. Yeah.
you're hitting a little bit of a nerve for me actually here,
Mm-mm.
because I think one of the things that I hear you all saying, the things that I hear you all saying, I hear, wow, that is a lot of time to set up, to pack the jars, to wash the jars, to pack. Ideally, wash them then pack them. Wash the jars, pack the jars, let it go. Get multiple canners going, etc. And that has a lot of value. It's really cool. But a couple years ago, Annie and I had Annie's my wife and co-gardener. We had to have a pretty frank conversation because we had kind of lost the joy of doing annual vegetable production.
Mhm.
And granted, we did not do the things that we said would go small. We were going big, and it came to this point where I felt, I'll speak for myself, I felt like there's almost this like identity thing where people knew that that was a thing that I did, and I felt like I was supposed to do that or had to keep doing that in order to retain this sense of participating in the local food economy or whatever. And we canned probably 150 jars of
Oh wow,
tomatoes that we used
wow.
throughout the course of the year,
that's a lot of tomatoes.
and we did dry storage on 150 plus butternuts that we had throughout the year. I mean, this is just in our backyard in Lexington. And we came to a point where it's like we are at a different point in our lives. Time is something that we don't have a whole lot of. And so we had to kind of make a decision. And I think that's one of those things. That's why I asked why you do it. And we weren't doing it for good reasons anymore. And so we changed that. And I think you have to sort of think about, well, how much time do you have? And there's times in my life where I didn't have any money, and all I had was time. And I spent my time more than I spent my money. And it's a different, things change. And so I think one of the reasons, speaking again from personal transition, is I think a bad reason to garden is because you feel like you're supposed to, because of some sort of identity or some sort of like, this is what people do, or this is what people need to do. And that there are a lot of people out there in this local food world, in this farm world, that are growing food for you and your family to eat. And it's totally chill to go and buy that stuff from them and spend your time doing what you want to do. And maybe that looks like, I'm going to have some trees and have a nice lawn and spend time outside out in the backyard instead of having any garden. I'm going to do that instead. And that's just something that, like, you
Those
all,
farmers would thank you for that.
yeah,
Yes.
totally. And I think, again, there's a whole spectrum of sizes and scales. And does it make you appreciate how hard it is to grow tomatoes so that you're more willing to go and buy some tomatoes from people who are working hard to do it? I think absolutely it does. I think sometimes gardening is the biggest boon to supporting local producers, because you realize the difficulty of that. But yeah, I think if you're getting joy from it, or if there's a real strong economic incentive or any of those reasons, it's really great to grow your stuff and can it. But if you're not in that position, there's space for you to fit in and to not have to spend a whole ton of money to do it. I think that's one of the main takeaways we want from this episode.
There's all kinds of kinds.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just lucky. I guess knowing your local food web, your local food situation, if you make a choice to buy, really super local in season stuff, is getting to know, like you all have alluded to today, is getting to know your local neighborhood, your local community, your local county, whatever unit you're looking at, is get to know the people that grow and do things, whether or not you want to, grow and preserve your own food, or if you want to purchase a local transplant. Just knowing those vendors is can help you make informed decisions and set up a situation that works for you and your family. With all the inputs. So,
but by all means, please do go forth and grow a garden, because it's one of the best. This is one of the best.
If you do want to garden, we've talked predominantly about food here, but we all know Alexis can't leave without flowers. Flowers are gardening. You can totally grow flowers. There's lots that you can grow there, but we have some from, jumping back into veg gardening that would also have some really good resources if you're wanting to grow, flowers or herbs and some things along those lines. There's some really good resources that the University of Kentucky has. If you're in Kentucky, I think that probably an extension service in your state has something similar, but one, we call it the Bible of Kentucky vegetable gardening, ID 128, which is Kentucky vegetable gardening. You can look that up. You can find it on the Hort Culture website at UK. We'll drop a link in the show notes for that, but we look at it all the time. I look at it all the time just for some resources. If you don't know how much soil it takes, how many cubic feet of soil it takes to put in a raised bed, or how many tomatoes you can put in a pot, or what size pot you need for basil, it's got some good information in there. And so it's just really excellent. It's free online. If you go to your local extension office, they should have a copy. If you're a person who likes a paper copy, you can get a paper copy from them as well. So if that's of interest of you, please go find that. And we've got some resources for flowers. And if you need help on, something, can you use certain types of containers, or you're like, why can't I use railroad ties, or don't use black tires for your raised bed gardens unless you like snakes. So if you need any help going in those areas, please feel free to reach out. You can shoot us an email, and that email goes to all four of us all at the same time. And so we'll make sure that your answer order is delivered promptly. And if you've got any other thoughts, ideas, please feel free to reach out. Follow us on Instagram at Hort Culture Podcast, and join us for next time. We were glad you're here. Have a great one.